All right, let's start with the big story that we're tracking at this hour, where the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has unveiled the Gandhi plaque, marking the immersion site of Mahatma Gandhi's ashes at the Clifford Pier in Singapore. And the Indian Prime Minister has also reached the last leg of his three-nation tour. Notably, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will also be meeting with US Defence Secretary James Mattis in Singapore shortly. During his first engagement of the day, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has met with Singapore's former Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong. The Prime Minister Modi also has a packed schedule before leaving for the Indian capital of New Delhi today, which includes a visit to the India Heritage Centre. Remember, on Friday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered the keynote address at the ShangriLa Dialogue, an eminent security dialogue held annually in Singapore. And in doing so, Narendra Modi has become the first Indian Prime Minister ever to address the group. Now, in his address, the Indian Prime Minister also highlighted the need for a more inclusive Indo-Pacific region, one that is based on open and equal access for all.
A common rule-based order for the region, and it must equally apply to all individually as well as to the global commons. Such an order must believe in sovereignty and territorial integrity as well as equality of all nations, irrespective of size and strength. These rules and norms should be based on the consent of all, not on the power of the few. This must be based on faith in dialogue and not dependence on force. It also means that when nations make international commitments, they must uphold them. We should all have equal access as a right under international law to the use of common spaces on the sea and in the air. That would require freedom of navigation, unimpeded commerce, and peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with international law. When we all agree to live by that code, our sea lanes will be pathways to prosperity and corridors of peace. This region and all of us have benefited from globalization. Indian food is among the best example of these benefits. But there is growing protectionism in goods and in services. Solutions cannot be found behind walls of protection, but in embracing change.
The Prime Minister Narendra Modi also used his address to stress on the need for greater cooperation between the ASEAN nations. Without naming names, he also referred to China's spread in the South China Sea. Now, the Indian Prime Minister referred to the need for the free passage and open seas and oceans to ensure peace in the region.
I'm here to say that the future we seek does not have to be as elusive as ShangriLa, that we can shape this region in our collective hopes and aspirations. Nowhere is it more apt to pursue this than in Singapore. The great nation shows us that when the oceans are open, the seas are secure, countries are connected, the rule of law prevails, and the region is stable, nations small and large prosper as sovereign countries.
All right, so that was Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his keynote address at the ShangriLa Dialogue. And to discuss more on this, we are joined in by our political affairs correspondent who is presently in Singapore and is tracking all the details very, very closely for us. Good morning to you, Karthikeya. This was such an important address which Prime Minister Narendra Modi has delivered, and he's touched upon several key issues, highlighting the fact that an Asia of cooperation will definitely fare better than an Asia of rivalries?
See, for me, the biggest takeaways were that the Prime Minister had spoken about the strategic autonomy, one. Prime Minister continuously used the word ASEAN. Prime Minister was conciliatory towards Russia and China. And Prime Minister spoke about a multipolar world. And he also spoke about a world where superpower rivalry should not reorder every relationship around. The problem which has emanated is that China has emerged like a co-hegemon, and China is reordering its part of the Asia. Americans are extremely concerned about that because they have alliances. India is concerned because India is now not umbilically connected with Southwest Asia the way it is connected to East Asia. There is a paradigm shift which has taken place in Indian diplomacy. You see, from past 1,300 years, everything which we would say, or not everything, at least majority of, I would say, imports took place from the West Asia, which came from Iran, Central Asia. You look at the empires, the language, the food habits, food techniques. Even Indian Islam is highly influenced by Persia rather than the Saudi Islam or Yemeni Islam or Omani Islam. After 1991, the Narasimha Rao came and he coined the word Look East. Now, Look East has been renamed as Act East by Narendra Modi. And what has happened in past 28 years, 27 years is that 70% of the Indian trade is with Southeast Asia. You're 1/4 to, I would say, 30% of the oil comes from the Malacca Strait. There is no road going from Delhi to Amritsar to Lahore to Rawalpindi to Kabul to Tashkent to Herat to Persia. It's not happening, you know. Most of the places are radicalized, run by warlords. There is no business there. There is no industry there, apart from natural resources. So this has to be India's destiny, for one simple reason, that not only there's a cultural connect, but look at these nations. They were devastated by the brutal Japanese aggression in 1940s. Brutal is the word. And see where they have reached. Look at Jakarta, Singapore, Hanoi, Manila. They have all remade themselves. Absolutely. These are hard-working economies, labor-intensive economies, and I think India looks forward to these. And most of all, multicultural, multi-religious, ethnically diverse, but all connected to the world through oceans.
Absolutely indeed. And also, Karthikeya, the other significant meeting which Prime Minister Narendra Modi will have is with the US Defense Secretary of State James Mattis. And also considering the fact that the United States has now called its Pacific Command the Indo-Pacific Command, how crucial do you think this meeting is? What is likely to also be discussed between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and James Mattis?
You see, my understanding is that the Mattis is obviously going to take up the issue of China. There is no doubt about it. You know, India has a very fine line to walk. See, India cannot be and should not be co-opted by Americans in their games against China, because China is our neighbor. But India cannot also play a subservient role to China, because China has this complex of the Middle Kingdom to reclaim what was lost under the brutal colonial rule. So, you know, between the two, India will have to walk the fine line. And I think India has found that fine line. And that fine line is neither China nor America. It is Southeast Asia. It is an intense cooperation with economies like Philippines, Singapore, Cambodia, Myanmar, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Australia. You know, Australia is not part of Southeast Asia, but the Quad stays. And though Indonesia is very critical of Quad, they feel that, you know, Australia should not have a strong influence there. But, you know, New Zealand and Australia coming in, people forget that the massive Indian diaspora which took place in early 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s in America has now shifted to Australia. The Indian diaspora is actually not taking place in Europe and America. It is actually, Saleh, taking place in Australia.
Absolutely.
Europe has only taken in people from West Asia because of the war. And not only taken in, people walked inside Europe because they could not stop them. You know, how do you stop 1 lakh people marching? Or how do you stop 50,000 people marching? You can't do that. And they walked all the way from Syria to Scandinavian countries, you know. People chose the country they wanted to go. So the refugees were given safe passage. People don't understand that part of the history. It was like a refugee march,
Right.
but the voluntary diaspora is taking place in these areas. You know, and huge Indian population in all these cities, because you have business. In New India is highly integrated in the digital economy, and Southeast Asia wants that.
Absolutely indeed, Kartikeya. Do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, the big focus today, of course, will be the US Defense Secretary James Mattis will be putting aside for a meeting with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi today in Singapore. The Pentagon has said that it would not be surprised if there was a pull aside. Now, both the Indian Prime Minister and also US Defense Secretary James Mattis are in Singapore for the ShangriLa Dialogue. The US Secretary of Defense James Mattis will also be delivering a major speech on US leadership and the challenges of the Indo-Pacific security. The Mattis hopes to assure allies of America's commitment to the region and also its aim of checking China's seemingly inexorable rise and also its belligerence in the South China Sea region. In the year 2016, the United States had designated India as a major defense partner with the aim of improving military cooperation, increasing information sharing and also cutting red tape to ease defense deals.
Know that. I believe Prime Minister Modi has a speech before Secretary Mattis. I would not be surprised if there was a pull aside, but I'll come back to you on that specific point.
And also interestingly, in a speech at the ShangriLa Dialogue in Singapore, US Defense Secretary James Mattis hailed India's role in maintaining peace and security in Afghanistan and also the Indo-Pacific region. Now, Mattis slammed China for its policy in the South China Sea, saying that no one nation can dominate the Indo-Pacific region. Now, Mattis has also said that China's policy goes against the US policies of open seas. And further commenting on India and United States ties, Mattis said that the Indo-US cooperation goes well beyond the Indo-Pacific region. The Mattis has said that the United States has a natural partnership with India.
For as Prime Minister Modi reflected last night, a commitment to common values must be a foundation, or even the foundation, upon which we build a shared destiny. Standing shoulder to shoulder with India, ASEAN, and our treaty allies and other partners, America seeks to build an Indo-Pacific where sovereignty and territorial integrity are safeguarded, the promise of freedom fulfilled, and prosperity prevails for all. Freedom for all nations, large and small, that need to transit those waters for their own prosperity, and they have every reason to do so. So we do not see it as a militarization by going through what has traditionally been an international water space. What we see it as is a reaffirmation of the rules-based order. And I will be going to Beijing to have further discussions on this at your government's invitation here at the end of the month. But I understand the disagreement, but it is not one on which we are unstudied, and we believe it's only appropriate that we keep those waterways open for all nations.
All right, so that was James Mattis there in his address at the ShangriLa Dialogue. And Kartikeya, if I can come to you on this, you know, you've been watching the developments there very closely. You also heard what James Mattis had to say. Do you get a sense that the United States is actually courting India to try and draw India into the great game that is presently unfolding in the South China Sea? And India has in fact decided to walk a very thin line where it has called for an open access to sea lanes. On the one side, telling China that perhaps it is going well beyond its mandate, but also talking about protectionism that's been unleashed by the United States, especially in the context of China.
See, before I answer that question, the meeting between the Prime Minister and James Mattis has started in the hotel. The Mattis has arrived and the meeting has started. India is walking the fine line. For example, the pull aside did not take place. Many people think, why has Mattis called upon the the Prime Minister? Because pull aside would have meant that the special gesture has been made by Prime Minister of India, because he's the Defense Minister, he's Defense Secretary. And there's a protocol issue. That is why Defense Secretary James Mattis had to come to Fullerton and call upon Indian Prime Minister. See, this is the way power changes. There was no pull aside which happened yesterday, and this is also not a pull aside. It is a calling upon which has happened. And please understand that pull aside was not entertained by Indian side because he is the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. He is the Defence Minister. And protocol-wise, Narendra Modi is up there. So that is why he had to come and meet Narendra Modi. So it's not a pull aside. It's a call upon, and it has been ensured that it remains a call upon.
Absolutely, indeed. We'll have to leave it there, but what comes of this meeting is going to be watched very, very closely. Thank you very much indeed, Karthikeya, for joining us from Singapore and getting us all those inputs.